Merry Christmas, everybody. And for your Christmas gift today, I'm going to continue to pound into your hearts and your minds what our country was built on. Every nation is built on ideas. Some are written in law, some are carried in tradition, and some are taught quietly from one generation to the next, long before anyone ever votes, fights, or governs. In America, the founders didn't just assume liberty would survive on paper alone. They assumed it would survive because the people themselves would live by a higher moral law. And at the center of that moral world, for most early Americans, stood Christmas. Not as a commercial holiday, not as a sense of seasonal comfort, but as a reminder of the sacrifice, humility, responsibility, and peace. Those ideas didn't just stay in church on Sunday. They followed Americans into courts, assemblies, battlefields, and homes. They shaped how liberty itself was understood. And so tonight, we look at how the birth of Christ quietly shaped the moral soil in which the American Republic took root. Merry Christmas and welcome to our Republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
By the time of the American Revolution, Christianity had been woven into colonial life for nearly 150 years. Churches were everywhere. Sermons were public events. The Bible was the most commonly printed book in the colonies. Moral instruction wasn't separate from education, law, or daily life. The founders did not expect a liberty to function in a moral vacuum. They assumed that self-government required self-restraint, and that self-restraint for most Americans came from Christian teaching. John Adams famously wrote that the Constitution was made for a moral and religious people, and it wasn't just a slogan. Again, it was a warning. A free system without internal moral limits would not survive. The Republic was designed for people who had already learned how to govern themselves, first in conscience, then in community, then in law. Like I said before, the only acceptable form of government is self-government. At the heart of Christmas is the incarnation, the belief that God entered humanity, the belief that God entered human history as a man. That belief produced something radical in the ancient world, the idea that every human life carries inherent dignity because God chose to dwell among humanity. That concept filtered directly into the American political thought. If human beings possessed a dignity given by God, then rights are not created by government. Authority alone is not absolute. Power must answer to a higher law. Those ideas sit at the center of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Christmas enforced them year after year in culture long before they were written into law. Christmas is also the story of sacrifice, not comfort, not power, but sacrifice. That theme shaped how early Americans understood duty to family, community, and country. The individual who founded the education system in the United States when it first was going to be a public education system said that the schools existed to teach people how to serve God, serve their country, and serve their family. And he said it's that order because in order to serve your country, you have to serve God. And in order to preserve your family, you have to serve your country. Liberty was never seen as a license to avoid obligation. It was seen as a responsibility to protect something larger than oneself. At Valley Forge, Washington's army observed Christmas not with abundance, but with hunger and cold, and yet morale endured because the men believed their suffering served a higher cause. Those ideas of sacrifice for the sake of others did not originate in politics. They were taught from the pulpit long before they were practiced in uniform. Christmas proclaims peace, not pacifism. Early Americans believed in the idea of just war. That force could be moral when used to defend life, liberty, and the innocent, and the immoral when used for conquest or tyranny. That belief carried into how war powers were structured in the Constitution. The president couldn't declare war alone. Congress could not wage war without public accountability, and military force was always meant to remain subordinate to civilian authority. These weren't merely political safeguards. They reflected a moral understanding of power rooted in Christian teaching. Power must be restrained, violence must be justified, and authority must remain accountable. The American system was designed around the dangerous idea that ordinary people could govern themselves, but self-government only works if people are capable of self-control. Christmas enforced that discipline every year through humility over pride, service over entitlement, community over self-interest, and conscience over impulse. These weren't just spiritual ideas, they were civic ones. A population trained to restrain itself internally requires far fewer external restraints from the state. The founders expected Americans to bring these habits into public life. They built a government that depended on them. From the earliest days of the Republic, Christmas was publicly acknowledged. Presidential proclamations of fasting, prayer, and Thanksgiving were common. Churches held national services during times of war and crisis. Military chaplains preached Christmas sermons in camps and forts. Schools openly taught Christian morality as part of civic education. Christmas was not treated as a private custom. It was recognized as part of the moral rhythm of a nation. The American public could not emerge from ideology alone. It emerged from habits shaped in families, churches, towns, classrooms. Christmas returned each winter as a reminder of why dignity matters, why sacrifice is noble, why power must be restrained, why peace must be protected, and why liberty requires character. Law can restrain behavior, but only morality sustains freedom. The American Republic did not rise on a law alone. It rose on moral understanding that liberty requires discipline, that power must answer to conscience, and that human life carries dignity because it's given by God. Those ideas were enforced not only in debate halls and battlefields, but in quiet moments of worship, reflection, and story. And they were repeated every Christmas. So Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank you for listening. And remember, history isn't boring. It's the story of a nation that learned how to govern itself because it first learned how to govern the human heart through Christ's sacrifice. Merry Christmas. We'll see you next time.